Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Few people are aware of an ancient race called the Minoans. Where did they come from? Where did they go? Did they leave anything behind that can help the people of today? Mission Evolution Radio Show is coming to you around the world on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. With us this hour to unearth the mysterious Minoans is Laura Perry, the author of Pantheon, the Minoans. Laura is the founder of Ariadne's tribe, a world-inclusive Minoan spiritual tradition. She's a priestess and creator who works magic with words, paint, ink, music, textiles, and herbs. Her website, lauraperryauthor.com. Laura, thank you so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Thanks so much for having me.
So your bio says you're a priestess. Tell us a little about that, would you?
Well, I am a pagan, a polytheist, and a spirit worker, and I serve as clergy in the greater pagan community, specifically as the founder and temple mom of Ariadne's tribe. I serve the modern pagan community in a way similar to how ancient priestesses would have served their religious communities.
Okay. So what's a spirit worker?
A more common term for it these days might be shaman, but I prefer to use spirit worker because that's a more anglicized term. It doesn't refer to any other culture. And so that's also part of my work. Specifically, I work as a psychopomp, and it's sometimes called a death walker. Working with the spirits of the dead.
Okay, Laura, for our audience, would you please describe what is a psychopomp?
The word comes from Greek roots that literally mean soul conductor. A psychopomp is a person or a spirit guide or even a deity who helps the spirits of the dead transition to the next portion of their experience.
So if I understand you correctly, a psychopomp doesn't necessarily have to be human. They could be an angel, say, for instance.
That's true.
Ah, how nice. I hope a whole bunch of angels come when it's my time. So also, there's death doulas, and they lead us up to the point of death, right? And then is that where the psychopomp takes over?
Yes.
Okay. And you don't do the death doula particularly, or yes?
I have done a little of that kind of work, but it's not really my specialty.
Gotcha. So what's your educational background?
It is many and varied. I began life as an academic studying linguistics and worked my way through a doctorate in naturopathy. I have been an herbalist and natural health care person for however many years it is since 1991. The math eludes me at the moment. And those are important aspects of my life, but they are not the crux of my spiritual practice. All of my spiritual training has come through private instructors in the local community wherever I lived at the time.
Okay. So that's where you learned how to be a psychopomp?
Yes.
I gotcha. So how that education leads you to the Minoans?
The Minoans were very much their own thing. They came to me, in a manner of speaking. When I was in high school, I took an art history class, and we had this massive sort of unabridged dictionary, or for those of you who are old enough to remember what a telephone book looks like, a telephone book sized textbook, which was really quite daunting. but it had these beautiful sections of full color plates in it. And one of the first few days of class, the teacher had us flipping through, looking at these color plates of all of this artwork from around the world and across time. And I turned the page to a full-size, full-page, full-color picture of the Minoan bull leaper fresco. And I just got goosebumps head to toe, and some kind of a doorway opened within me. And that was my introduction to the Minoans, and they have been a persistent force in my life ever since then.
So did the plate work somewhat like a mandala? In other words, it puts you into altered space?
Looking back on it, I think that's quite possible. At the time, I really had no training, no context for the experience that I was having.
So what was the picture of? You mentioned the name, but what
Yeah.
did it look like?
So the bull leaper fresco is a wall painting from the ancient Minoan temple of Knossos, and it shows a beautiful tan and white spotted bull galloping across the sort of vivid blue background with three bull leapers in the middle of their activity. So there's one at the front of the bull who's hanging onto his horns, getting ready to flip up and leap. And then there's another one who is upside down over the bull's back in the middle of a somersault. And then there's a third one who has landed behind the bull and is standing with arms up. And so it's sort of a snapshot of what we think the bull leaping activity might have looked like in ancient Crete.
The original toreadors.
Yeah.
Amazing. So what part of the world was the remains of the Minoans found?
Okay, so their culture was centered on the island of Crete, which is the largest island in the Aegean Sea, which is the part of the Mediterranean Sea that is just south and east of mainland Greece. So this is a Mediterranean culture.
And they were on an island?
Yes. The island of Crete is about it's about 150 miles long, so it's actually, quite sizable. It's not a tiny little dot in the ocean. And they were a seafaring people. They traded across the sea, all over the Eastern Mediterranean, all the way west, even to the Straits of Gibraltar, and possibly outside the Mediterranean as well.
About what year was this? About where does it fall in history?
Okay, so the part of Minoan culture that we think of as classical Minoans, the time when they did the kinds of art and built the kinds of buildings that we recognize as Minoan, was during the Bronze Age. So this is from about 3000 to about maybe 1300 BCE.
Goodness. Was there a lot of seafaring people during that time?
There were a fair number. The Minoans were probably the biggest, the ones with the largest number of ships and the most enthusiastic sailors. But all the other cultures along the coastline in the Mediterranean also sailed, with the possible exception of the Egyptians. The Egyptians appear to have preferred to stick to their river, the Nile. Although other traders did come to Egypt. But yeah, people along the Levant, the eastern coast there, and along the coasts of what are today Greece and Italy, North Africa, the south of France and Spain, those areas all had seafaring peoples settled along the coastlines there.
Were the land masses fairly close together so that they were kind of prompted, realize there's somebody else over there? They were prompted to go to sea?
Well, the interesting thing is, none of the land has changed substantially in the past, say, 10,000 years. None of it has shifted. The thing that I find interesting is that people have actually been sailing in the Mediterranean for probably 100,000 years.
My goodness.
Yeah, maybe not in as fancy ships and not to such a great extent, but I think there's a natural human curiosity about, what's over there. And that I think has always taken hold of people. Um, Most of the sailing that happened in that era was within sight of the shore. There were only a few places where people would actually just take off straight across the water in a place where you couldn't see the shoreline. Most of the time, they moved just far enough offshore for the ship to be safe and then just sailed along the coastline.
So is that how the trading took place? Is sailing along the coastline, or were the Minoans brave and went clear over to a different landmass?
The Minoans may have been a little braver than some of the others, but for the most part, if you've got a giant ship and a bunch of people who are very skilled sailors and who have a valuable cargo, and you don't want to wreck, then you're going to make prudent choices and not take big risks. So they mostly sailed within view of the coastline. There are a few places um, where there was passage across the water, like from the Nile Delta straight north to Crete. That's a stretch of open water. Or from Crete straight north to the Greek mainland. That's also a stretch of open water.
Well, it sounds like these people were by no means isolated, and yet isn't there traditions and pictures and styles and fashions and way of life quite different from those around them?
They really were. If you examine the art and the iconography of their religion, it's pretty clear that they maintained Neolithic religion and culture all the way into the Bronze Age. And so to us, that's beautiful and fascinating, but it's likely that back then in the Bronze Age, all of their neighbors kind of viewed them as those strange, backwards Orthodox people who still do the old fashioned stuff. So,
A lot of us know that pain, right?
yeah.
So they were in about the same time that the Egyptians were also a thing.
Yeah, the height of Minoan civilization. To put this in context, most people are familiar with some of the big names from Egypt, like Hatshepsut, Tutankhamun, Akhenaten, Nefertiti. Those people lived in Egypt at the same time as the height of Minoan civilization. So it's that same era.
Well, Laura, it's time for us to take a station break. Laura and I will return very shortly, so don't you go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
One people, one nation, searching through the night. One people, one nation, searching for the light. One people. The end has come, the night has fallen.
Who were the Minoans, and why do we care? With us this hour discussing the ancient Minoans is Laura Perry, the author of Pantheon, the Minoans. Laura, who were the Minoans?
They were a Bronze Age Mediterranean culture um, who were a vibrant, colorful people who have a lot to teach us about how we can live a joyful life.
Well, we could use some joy around here, that's a fact. So they were pretty much focused on peace and joy and happiness and all that wonderful New Age stuff.
Yeah, I guess maybe you could call it old age stuff since they lived,
Yeah.
4 or 5,000 years ago.
Right.
Um, yeah, they were kind of unique in their sort of Mediterranean homeland because they were not interested in conquest, except maybe economic conquest. They appear not to have had a military. Instead, they put all of their money into their trading fleets and their economy. And so they traded with every other culture they came in contact with all around the Mediterranean. Um, they traded even overland, apparently, as far as India and the North Sea. Um, so they were more interested in beauty and joy than in war.
Oh, sounds like already we find something we can learn from them, right?
I sure hope so.
So on another note, what's a pantheon?
A pantheon is a family of deities that belongs to a specific culture.
Oh, okay. And I take it the Minoans had a pantheon.
They did. Every culture back then had a pantheon. We live in a world today of monotheistic religions. And so the concept of having multiple deities may be a little unfamiliar to some people. Excuse me. But before the advent of monotheism, every culture was polytheistic. That means they had many gods, many deities, gods and goddesses.
What I understand, and I could be totally wrong, is that being the case, there was still a concept of where they all met and became one. You know,
Um, in some cultures, there certainly was a concept of an overall oneness. That overall oneness usually encompassed not just the deities, but also humanity and all of creation.
there's another great concept. So were the Minoans the first civilization in Europe?
Um, pardon me. Were they?
The question, did you need that again, or?
Yes, please.
Okay, I said were the Minoans one of the first civilizations in the European area?
They are considered the first European civilization. They are older than the Greeks, and they are not actually Greek. This is this is a piece of information that sometimes gets confusing because the island of Crete belongs to the modern nation of Greece. It has been a part of Greece for about the past century, but that's only the past century. Before that, Crete was ruled by the British, the Persians, the Ottoman Turks, Rome, anybody who could take it over. But Crete is actually its own its own entity, and DNA evidence shows us that the Minoans are actually descended from people who came from Anatolia, which is modern day Turkey, back in the Neolithic era, like 10,000 BCE.
Goodness.
Yeah, these are one of the waves of migration that came out of that area. And this is the era of like Göbekli Tepe and the old European cultures of the Vinca and the Cucuteni and the people like that. They were one of the waves of migration that came out of there and expanded across Europe. And this was before the Indo-Europeans migrated in. So this is the sort of the first layer of the farming civilization of Europe. And the Minoans were part of that.
So who's older, the Minoans or the Egyptians?
Oh gosh. I guess that depends on how you define Minoan and Egyptian, because the Minoans, their ancestors came to Crete around 10,000 BCE. That's a very long time ago. And that's when that island was first permanently settled. But we don't think of Minoan culture as really existing in its classical form until about 3000 BCE. So there were people there all along, right? They just didn't have that particular culture until a certain point. There were people there in Egypt in 10,000 BCE as well. They had a completely different culture from what we think of as classic ancient Egypt, which interestingly started about the same time, 3000 BCE, as the height of Minoan civilization. So,
Did those two civilizations have anything in common?
I guess you could say they were both vibrant, lively, joyful cultures that were also obsessed with death.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know the Minoans were also obsessed with death.
I mean, from a modern standpoint, we probably think of them as obsessed with death. They probably didn't think it was odd to have the ancestors and the spirits of the dead as an important aspect of their spiritual life.
Well, when you consider how terrified most Westerners are of death and try to pretend it's never going to happen, there's a certain amount of wisdom in that, isn't there?
Well, I guess it depends on your relationship with death, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's that. There's that for sure. So, when they were obsessed with death, I know the Egyptians did the huge, temples and pyramids and to preserve their dead. Did the Minoans have any practices similar to that?
No, actually, the Minoans did something that's almost the exact opposite. Um, while the Egyptians had monumental tombs and setups in the tombs to preserve the body and to make an afterlife that looked just like this life. Um, the Minoans had communal tombs. Their community and connection with each other, not just within the family, but within the community, was clearly a very important aspect of Minoan culture. Um, and so they had communal tombs where they actually had feasts on a seasonal basis to celebrate their beloved dead. Um, Hundreds of dishes have been found on the plazas at these tombs where they had these massive feasts to share food with each other and to make offerings to their beloved dead. I don't know how much detail you would like to get into in this particular program about funerary rites and how the bodies were prepared. But anyway, they had a very an intimate relationship with their dead.
Was it a spiritual relationship as well, as in, do you think they communicated with their dead?
I have no doubt they did. Um, there's no way to prove that one way or another, but it is instructive to look at cultures that today still have active ancestor veneration and relationships with spirits of the dead. And those cultures today communicate with their dead, communicate to them and receive communication from them. And so I see no reason whatsoever that the Minoans would not have been the same way.
Which cultures still do that today?
Um, oh gosh, you're going to make me get out my notes. Um, there are the most well-known ones are actually in Asia now and in Southeast Asia, but I'm trying to think of one culture that I have visited myself is the modern Maya in Central America also. Still revere their dead and make offerings to them and speak with them and receive messages from them, just like their ancestors did centuries ago.
That would be a useful skill if you think about it. And we could talk to people about, when did it look like this last time, and what was the outcome, and what can you tell us? I mean, I can see where that would be so useful.
Yeah, I wonder to what extent the dead have a more expansive view than we do, simply by virtue of not being encased in a body anymore. But I also wonder to what extent they carry their preconceptions with them. I believe it was Edgar Casey who said a dead Presbyterian is still a Presbyterian.
Interesting. Are we talking about the dead that are still here or the dead that have crossed over? Because I understand there's a certain amount of changing all of that as you, raise frequency enough, shed your humanness to cross.
Yeah, I have the ancestral reverence is an active part of my personal spirituality, that dovetails with my work as a death walker, but it's also just my personal spiritual practice. And I have experienced what you might call two different levels of the dead. Um, One is the individual personalities of people who have been a part of my life before they passed on. Um, and a second level is what you might call the ancestral stream. And that is, I guess you might describe it as the song that is sung by all the ancestors together who have passed on fully and are healed and whole.
Yeah, that sounds like a nice other side rather than all these personalities that haven't evolved at all.
Yeah, I mean, I have the sense that just like in
Well,
just like in
I'm
hmm?
going to have to leave this as a cliffhanger, Laura, because
Oh,
it's
okay.
time for us to take another station break.
Okay.
Laura and I will be right back to continue our discussion, so stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
One people, one nation, searching through the night. One people, one nation, searching for the light. One people, one nation, coming from the sky. I've been broken, shattered, cast to the wind. I am scattered upon the wind. I've been broken, shattered, cast to the wind. I am scattered.
What did the Minoans know? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us this hour discussing the gifts of the Minoans is Laura Perry. Her website, lauraperryauthor.com. Before we go on to what the Minoans knew, we were talking about the ancestral stream versus just the personality of someone that has crossed. Would you continue with that, please?
Yeah, my thought with my experience of those two levels of the dead, if you want to call them that, is that just as in life, we have support and guidance from many levels for our evolution, but no one can be forced to evolve. It's something we have to choose to do. We have to choose to take that step. And my experience thus far, anyway, has been that it's the same with the spirits of the dead, that they have to choose to take that step.
So, in other words, they hang around here disembodied unless they evolve to a higher frequency or whatever to access the other side or unity.
Yeah, or unless they're helped. Um, Sometimes I feel like being a psychopomp, doing that kind of work, is essentially being a therapist to the dead, um, to help them work through whatever the problem is that's keeping them from moving on.
That's what we're confronted with as living right now, isn't it? With things changing so quickly, is having to heal a lot of our a lot of our woundedness that keeps us stuck in life.
It really
Um,
is, yeah.
yeah, it's not any different. That's pretty fascinating. So, what did the what happened to the Minoans? What happened to them? Where'd they go?
Oh, a lot of things happened to the Minoans, which is why I think they may be extraordinarily relevant to our modern day. Um, the final end of Minoan culture was an era that is called the Late Bronze Age collapse, and it's one of many collapse periods that have happened over time throughout human history. But leading up to that, um, in around 1600 BCE, the island of Thera, which is now called Santorini, erupted. It was massive, a massive eruption, a huge tsunami and ash cloud that just absolutely scoured the entire eastern end of the Mediterranean.
Oh my goodness.
Um, Now, the Minoans miraculously survived. A significant portion of the coastal area of their island was destroyed, but they did survive, but they were very weakened. And that gave the Mycenaeans, who were the very early Greeks from mainland Greece, an opportunity. And we don't know exactly how this happened, but over the course of the next century or so, the Mycenaeans ended up occupying Knossos and trying to take over the island. Um,
Yeah, and they
as
had no, like you said, they had no military or anything to prevent that.
well, and no one had ever wanted to. No one had ever wanted to conquer Crete. Everyone was perfectly happy to trade with them.
There's
Um,
another lesson we could learn right now, yes?
yeah,
So, did the Minoans have a written language?
they did, but we can't read it.
So, how do we get all this information that you're sharing about the Minoans?
Well, the Minoans taught the Mycenaeans how to write, and even developed a script for them to use to read and write with. And we do have some of those clay tablets. So we have essentially thousands of accounting and bookkeeping records from the temple at Knossos and several other sites on Crete that tell us how things worked in that era.
So, basically, this entire culture and practice that you've taken up has had to be reconstructed. It wasn't carried forward.
That is correct.
That sounds like a great undertaking. Is that part of what you're doing?
It is. We're not attempting to exactly reconstruct ancient Minoan religion because we don't live in a Bronze Age world anymore. Um, and so what we are doing is using all of our available resources, which includes archaeology, archaeoastronomy, dance ethnology, and comparative mythology, to and linguistics, historical linguistics, to reconstruct what we can of Minoan religion and culture, and then use that basis to create something new in the modern day that connects back to the ancient Minoans.
Given all the religious practices and everything that's present, clear and present today, what was your motivation for digging clear into the past to find it?
Um, my personal motivation is that ever since I looked at that fresco in that art history textbook, I really feel like the Minoan deities have been kind of looking over my shoulder saying, hey, we would like people to know about us now, and to know about our culture. And I took that as my sort of personal creative pursuit for a long time. And in the past decade or so, it turns out I have found a number of other people who are also interested in it. So we've built a community of people who are in relationship with the ancient Minoan deities in the modern world.
So we've already mentioned just in passing several of the lessons or beliefs or practices of the Minoans that could be very useful for today, like trading versus taking over, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, do you feel that some of this can be resurrected and used today?
I certainly do. I think it's a matter of when people talk about creating change in a culture, quite often they talk about destroying or removing the existing power structures because those structures are detrimental in one way or another. But what people often don't think about is what they're going to replace those power structures with. And I think that's where the ancient Minoans can be very instructive. They can offer us ways to conceive of community and the economy that offer a much healthier way to be in relationship with each other and with the earth.
There were way fewer of them than there are of us now. Do you think that'll translate?
Well, actually, originally people thought that there weren't very many Minoans, but the archaeologists continue to find more and more sites on Crete from the Minoan era, to the point that now they think that ancient Crete was at least as heavily populated as modern Crete is now. Um, and so it's not so much a matter of how many of them there were in an absolute number as how many of them there were in a small space, yet they still were able to make it work.
I
And
understand.
so I think that can translate to spaces such as our cities.
Okay, that makes sense. And the lesson we've learned over the ages is it all begins within. So it begins with the individual, then it moves out into the family, then it moves out into the community. So if we could get our communities to get along, maybe it could rub off on the larger structures. Speaking of which, what kind of government did they have?
Well, interestingly, they appear not to have had a centralized government. Um, the Mycenaeans attempted to impose a centralized government across the entire island and failed. But before that, when it was a purely Minoan way of life on Crete, each of the major cities was its own administrative center for the surrounding area. So they were, I guess you could say, similar to the later Greek city-states, only the Minoan cities do not appear to have fought with each other or attempted to take over competing land or anything like that. They were simply there was it's kind of the way counties are set up in the United States. Each county is its own separate little administrative unit, but they're all neighbors and they're friendly with each other. It's very similar to that. And the Minoans were united across all those different cities and areas of farmland by their culture and their religion.
That's what I was going to ask. Was it the religion that united them? And that's very interesting. Would you consider their religion a shaman-based religion?
There is a good deal of evidence that they did trance work, ecstatic trance, trance possession, and other kinds of spirit work. So, yes.
Do you feel that that has flavored your psychopomp work?
I'm sure it has. Some of what I have learned, everyone who does spirit work has their human teachers and their spirit teachers. And some of my spirit teachers have come from the Minoan culture. And so that has influenced the way I view humanity's relationship with the spirits of the dead.
Which brings up an interesting question. Have you considered reconstructing, in the evidence for reconstruction, have you considered using the shamanic method to access the information?
We have done some of that. A number of us have been doing that kind of work.
I had a suspect. What have you found? Is that a fairly effective way of working?
Um, Most of the time it is. We have to be very careful. There is a significant amount of filtering through our own psyches that happens with anything like this, as every spirit worker knows. Every human has their biases.
Do you work with triangulation? In other words, you get journey information or spiritual information, and then compare it with the other information that you have, say from archaeology, etc.
Yes, yes. And we also use a method that is called shared gnosis, Gnosis, um, where a number of us will go independently seeking a set of information and then come back and compare notes and see where we have commonalities, where it overlaps.
Do you find a lot of commonalities?
We often do. We have found our way to a number of religious practices and even the identification of some deities with this
Amazing.
process.
Well, it's that magic moment. It's time for us to take another station break. Please stay with us as Laura and I continue to explore the evolutionary wisdom of the Minoans. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
One people, one nation, searching through the night. One people, one nation, searching for the light. Brilliant feathers of an unearthly hue glide by on the edge of his dream. A whisper of touch, and
We're the Minoans, shaman. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Laura Perry. Her website, lauraperryauthor.com. Laura, we were discussing using shamanism to reconstruct the Minoan culture and using triangulation to validate our experience that way. Um, and we have talked earlier in the show about they were probably a shamanic society. What indication do we have that they were probably shamanic in nature?
The first clue was in the art. There are a number of seal rings. The Minoans used seals, kind of like the way medieval Europeans used them to stamp a seal on wax.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, the Minoans stamped their seals in clay, and we think these were identifiers, like a signature.
Like for tradespeople, or
Yeah, or when people made donations to the temples when they gave offerings, and in commerce, um, and there were over 12,000 of them have been found so far. So these were a very common item. They were either carved in stone or fashioned out of gold. And the gold ones, they're these little oval. They're rings with an oval plate on the top that has a scene depicted on it. And almost all the scenes are ritual scenes, right? So
oh,
we're
okay.
getting a glimpse directly into a snapshot of Minoan religion. And one of the interesting aspects of these ritual scenes is that many of them have what are called floating objects in them. And these floating objects include, for instance, writhing serpents, and that the writhing serpent, is one of the most common enoptic phenomena in trance conditions, altered states of consciousness. There are also floating eyes and ears, which archaeologists have interpreted as the people in the scene having visions and auditory experiences. And then there are also tiny little floating human figures that are interpreted as the epiphany of a deity. A deity appears to the people in much the same way that, for instance, the ayahuasca spirit appears to people who are undergoing that ritual. So we have visual indications in the art that these people were experiencing this sort of thing in ritual.
Interesting. So you indicate the Minoans were technologically advanced for their time. Would you please explain?
Yeah, people are often shocked because they figure, that many thousand years ago, they must have been quite primitive. But they actually had manual flush toilets.
Seriously?
Yes, seriously.
Goodness.
And not just in the big temples, but also in homes in the cities. They've been found all over the place. They had enclosed sewers. They had aqueducts to bring water from the mountain springs into their cities. And this is thousands of years before the Romans.
Goodness.
Yeah, they had paved roads, many of which still exist today. Yeah, they had an incredible level of sanitation, which must have increased their health dramatically compared to other cultures of the time.
It sounds like they were well advanced beyond the cultural base of the time.
Definitely compared to all the other cultures in the Mediterranean. Yeah, although I have recently learned that there were some sewers in Mesopotamia at the time. So it's not entirely unheard of, but the Minoans were able to put so much of their resource base into that kind of public works to improving their society rather than having to waste that money on a military because they weren't interested in conquest. That they were able to move further ahead than others.
Another lesson for our modern people, yes?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so too. Um, so they weren't warlike. Did they ever have any wars amongst themselves that has been unearthed?
Uh, Not really. They're about once every 5 years, some academic or other writes a paper uh, absolutely insisting that they must have had a military or something of that sort. And it makes a flurry for a while and then it goes away because there's no hard evidence, to show anything like that. The closest I can come is there are a few spots on the island where at one point for about a 50 to 100-year time period, people were building small areas of defensive walls, like little small fortified walls and lookout towers. And archaeologists' best guess at this point is that either there was some kind of conflict among the people on the island, even though there's no real evidence of that, or there was a threat from outside. Some outside force or culture was a threat. That lasted no more than a century and then went away. So that's the closest we can come to any of that.
It makes you wonder if they didn't use their shamanic skills to foresee any threat and work around it.
Well, if they were smart, that's exactly what they would have done, isn't it?
Exactly. So, what have you guys unearthed about their educational practices?
Well, they were a literate culture. Um, like most literate cultures in the ancient world, it appears that only a small percentage of the people could actually read and write. But still, even if only 5 or 10% of your culture can read and write, that's in that time and place. That's a pretty substantial accomplishment. Um, Other than that, they appear to have been similar to other Bronze Age Mediterranean cultures. They would have had apprentices for the kinds of ordinary jobs that people had every day. The temples would have taken people in to train as clergy. It is likely that the Minoan temples did what the temples in Mesopotamia did, and take in the homeless and house them and give them training and jobs, because there were workshops in all the temples that created trade goods. Everything from jewelry and carved stone vases to hand-woven garments. So
Well, with all the struggling that we're doing with homeless right now, therein lies another lesson, yes?
I think so.
Yeah, it seems like they had a lot to share, even though they aren't around to share it. I'm so glad you guys are unearthing all of this. So, uh, what was unique about the Minoan religion? We understand that it's, probably shamanic in nature, but what else was unique about it?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the Minoans maintained Neolithic religious practices into the Bronze Age. So, in the Bronze Age, the religions around the Mediterranean had pantheons, families of deities that were often headed by male deities. That's just kind of what we're used to, right? Especially in this patriarchal world now, the male head of household applies to the religious setting as well. Um, the Minoans, as best we can reconstruct, appear to have had a pantheon, a family of deities that was headed by goddesses, and this would be more in keeping with a matrilineal culture, which the Minoans appear to have been. Um, in the vast majority of cultures, polytheistic cultures, the pantheon reflects the human cultural structure, which makes
Makes
sense.
sense.
I
Yeah,
mean,
makes sense.
and so in a matrilineal culture, you have the grandmothers, the eldest women, as the head of the clan, and then their descendants um, follow along the female line, and that appears to be the way the Minoan pantheon is structured.
Well, that certainly gives us a clue into the not warlike nature that they had, right? More nurturing.
Yeah, and the research that has been done into the Neolithic cultures of old Europe and Anatolia that the Minoans descended from suggests that it's also a more consensus-based community kind of cultural structure, where you don't have a single person telling other people what to do, and instead decisions are made collectively via thoughtful discussion.
There's another thing that would be a welcome change, isn't it?
No kidding.
Yeah. Do you think that that sort of change can happen with our large numbers at this point?
I don't see why it can't. Honestly, I've reached the conclusion that we're holding ourselves back. Um, most cultural changes, at least as far as I can tell from studying history, most cultural changes happen from the ground up. The ordinary people in their communities making changes, and then that expands slowly and relentlessly until it reaches the higher levels of society.
Yeah, again, the buck stops here. Well, we're about out of time in this whole show, so it's my chance to ask you, Laura, what's your mission?
My mission is to help people find connection with each other and with the divine, and to find joy in life.
Sounds like you're very pantheon in that, right?
I think so.
What's the wisdom of the Minoans that they have to offer us today? We've talked about a lot of it. Is there something that we've missed?
I don't know that we've missed any particular details. I do think something that the Minoans might remind us is that we are here because our ancestors survived,
Mhm.
whatever life threw at them. And so we will be somebody's ancestors. And so it is up to us to make it through this and make the world a better place for our descendants.
Beautifully stated. And it is that time. Laura, I can't thank you enough for all the research you do, all that you share, and for coming on the show.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Our guest this hour has been Laura Perry, the author of Pantheon, the Minoans. To find out more about Laura, where you can find her book and all she has to offer, visit her website, lauraperryauthor.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit missionevolution.org. Please join us next time. The mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to our evolving world.
One people, one nation, searching through the night. One people, one nation, searching for the light. One people, one nation, coming from the stars. One people, one nation, to hear